The Portal Under the Lake. Chapter 1. The First Whisper. The lake was black that night. Not the kind of black that comes from darkness alone, but the kind that swallows light whole, as if the stars above were afraid to look too long. The air hung heavy with the smell of wet earth, and the only sound was the slow lap of water against the rotting dock. Marco leaned on the wooden rail, his breath ghosting in the cold. He'd fished this lake since he was a boy, but something in its stillness tonight felt wrong. Usually, there were frogs, the rustle of reeds, the occasional splash of a carp. Tonight, it was silence, thick and absolute. That was when he heard it, a whisper. Faint, muffled, as if spoken through glass and water. His head jerked toward the sound, but all he saw was the endless black mirror stretching toward the far bank. Then it came again, closer this time, curling into his ear like breath. Marco. The voice was not one he knew, yet it spoke his name with the intimacy of an old friend. He stepped forward, the boards groaning under his boots, and peered into the depths. For a moment, he thought he saw something move beneath the surface, not a fish, not a shadow, but a pale face drifting up toward him. Then the water rippled violently, as if the lake exhaled. The face vanished. Marco's knuckles tightened around the rail. His grandfather had told him the stories, the ones no outsider believed, about a tunnel under the lake that led to a place not found on any map, where those who were never born here walked among the living. The fishermen whispered that sometimes, on cold, starless nights, they came back. Marco had always laughed it off. Until now, somewhere out in the darkness, a single bubble rose and broke the surface with a sound too loud for such a small thing. And when it popped, the whisper returned, clear and urgent. Help me. Chapter 2. The Net. By morning, the whisper had not left Marco's mind. It clung to him like the smell of lake water on old clothes. He barely slept, and when the first gray light bled through his curtains, he was already lacing his boots. The mist was still thick when he reached the shore. No wind, no sound, just the quiet glide of the fog over the water. He brought his old fishing net, the one his father used before him. The rope was frayed, the float scarred by years of use, but Marco trusted it more than any shiny new thing. He set out in his rowboat, the oars dipping into the water with soft, deliberate strokes. The lake was always deepest near the center, and that's where he was heading, to the place his grandfather had warned him about. They called it the Drop, a sudden hole in the lake bed where the water turned colder, darker, and the fish grew strange, with eyes too big and bones that bent in ways bones shouldn't. The fishermen said it was where the tunnel began. Marco dropped the net slowly, the rope sliding through his hands until he felt the weights hit the deep. He waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then a tug. It was small at first, like a lazy fish bumping the mesh. Then harder. The rope jerked violently, almost pulling him overboard. His pulse thudded in his ears as he braced his boots against the ribs of the boat. Something heavy was thrashing below, but it wasn't the frantic struggle of a fish. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone pulling back. Marco gritted his teeth and hauled the net up, hand over hand. The water's surface broke, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. It wasn't fish tangled in the net. It was a hand, pale, waterlogged, the fingers twisted in the ropes, and it was gripping back. Marco's breath froze in his chest. The hand tightened once, then slipped free, disappearing into the black. The net was empty. Chapter 3. The Second Voice. Marco stayed on the lake far longer than he meant to. It wasn't courage that kept him there, more like a strange pull, as if leaving too soon would mean missing something he wasn't supposed to miss. The fog shifted, curling into shapes that faded when he tried to focus on them. His oars barely made a sound as he drifted over the drop again. He told himself he wouldn't throw the net a second time, but his hands didn't listen. The rope slithered over the side. Down it went, into that cold, dark hole beneath the lake bed. This time, it didn't take long. The rope went slack for a moment, then came alive with a sharp jerk. Marco gripped it, leaning back with all his weight. But what broke the surface was not a hand. It was a face, half submerged, hair drifting in the water like black weeds, the skin pale and stretched too tight over bone. The eyes were open, not lifeless, but glowing faintly with a deep green shimmer. The lips moved under the water, but no sound came. Marco's throat closed. He couldn't move, couldn't think. Then, suddenly, he could hear it. Not with his ears, but somewhere inside his skull. "Don't listen to her." The voice was male, urgent, and it was coming from behind him. Marco spun in the boat. There was nothing there, just the fog. When he looked back, the face was gone. His hands were shaking when he pulled up the net empty again. The rope was wet and cold, but there was something else clinging to it. Strands of black hair, too long and too heavy to belong to any fish. The lake rippled once, then stilled. Chapter 4. Old Voices. By the time Marco reached the shore, his hands were numb from the cold and from gripping the oars too hard. He tied the boat to the dock with clumsy fingers and climbed out, boots squelching in the wet sand. Old Petro was already there. He sat on an upturned crate near the bait shack, wrapped in his oilskin coat, smoking a cigarette down to its last bitter breath. His eyes, small and sharp as fishhooks, followed Marco without a word. "You were out there long," Petro finally said, his voice like gravel. Marco didn't answer right away. He felt the weight of those black hair strands still in his pocket, damp against the fabric. "I saw something," he said at last. "In the net." Petro's gaze didn't waver. "Fish?" "No, a hand. And a face. It spoke to me." The cigarette paused halfway to Petro's lips. He didn't ask for details, didn't laugh, didn't call him a fool. Instead, he flicked the butt into the dirt and ground it under his boot. "You stayed too close to the drop," Petro said. "You heard them." Marco's skin prickled. "Them?" Petro leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the fog itself might be listening. "They're not ghosts," he said. "Not the dead. They are the ones who once lived here, but were never born here. They came through the tunnel under the lake, long before my time, long before my grandfather's. Some stayed, some went back. But the ones who return now, they're not the same." Marco swallowed. "Why would they come back?" Petro's eyes narrowed. "To finish what they couldn't before they left. And if they've started speaking to you," he shook his head, "you'd better pray you never hear your name from the water again." Marco thought of the whisper in the dark, the plea for help, and the second voice warning him away. It was already too late for that. Chapter 5. The Pull of the Deep. Marco told himself he wouldn't go back. He lasted barely a day. That night, the wind carried the smell of the lake straight through his open window, cold, mineral, and faintly metallic, like rusted chains left underwater too long. He tried to drown it out with the hiss of the stove, the crackle of dry wood in the fire, but it only made the silence outside sharper. When the whisper came again, it wasn't from the water. It was inside his head. "Marco, please." He froze with the mug halfway to his lips. The voice was the same as before, soft, almost breaking, but this time threaded with something new. Not fear, urgency. He didn't remember leaving the house, only the crunch of frost under his boots as he crossed the dark yard. The moon was a thin silver cut in the sky, barely enough light to see the outline of the dock. The lake was calm, too calm, its surface smooth as oiled glass. The boat rocked gently under his weight as he stepped in. He didn't take the net this time. Something told him it wouldn't matter. Rowing toward the drop felt different now. The air grew colder with every pull of the oars, the mist thicker until it beaded on his eyelashes. Somewhere beneath him, the water seemed to breathe. Then, without warning, the boat stopped moving. Not from a snag or shallow water, it was as if the lake itself was holding it still. The voice came again, clearer now, echoing in his skull. "They'll find me if you don't come now." The black water parted just enough for him to see movement below, not a single figure, but many, pale shapes drifting upward, their faces turned toward him, mouths moving soundlessly. One of them reached out not to grab him, but to point, downward. Marco leaned over, squinting into the depth. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw the dark mouth of a tunnel yawning wide beneath the boat. Then the shapes scattered, vanishing into the void. Something brushed the underside of the hull. Hard. Chapter 6. The Descent. The boat rocked once more, and this time the sound that came from beneath was unmistakable knuckles dragging across wood. Marco's heart was thundering, his breath misting in the cold air. He should have rowed back. He knew that. But the whisper came again, almost breaking now. "Please, hurry." The water below shimmered faintly, as if lit from far beneath. Without thinking, Marco shrugged off his coat and boots. The cold bit instantly into his skin. He gripped the side of the boat, took one last breath of the night air, and slid into the lake. The shock of it stole the breath from his lungs. It wasn't just cold, it was ancient, heavy, as though the water itself remembered every life that had touched it. He kicked downward, the surface above blurring into a silver smear. The light from below pulsed faintly, drawing him toward the drop. The pale shapes reappeared, swimming just out of reach, their movements slow and deliberate. None of them touched him. They only watched. Then he saw it. The tunnel. It was no natural cave. The edges were too smooth, too precise, as if carved by something with purpose. The light came from deep within it, not warm or golden, but a shifting spectrum that slid between green, violet, and silver. Marco hesitated at the threshold. The water here was thicker, harder to move through, as if he were pushing against invisible hands. His ears rang with the pressure, and the voice came again, sharper now. Inside, before they do, a shadow passed overhead, larger than any fish, larger than a man. It circled once, then again, each time a little lower. Marco took a deep breath, or tried to. The water pressed in on all sides, cold fingers clawing at his ribs. Then, with a final kick, he slipped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed him whole. Chapter 7. The World Below. The first thing Marco noticed was that the water inside the tunnel wasn't like the lakes. It was warmer, lighter, almost weightless, as if it wanted him there. He drifted forward without effort, the glow ahead pulsing like the heartbeat of something alive. The tunnel walls were smooth as glass, streaked with veins of faint light. Tiny motes floated in the water around him, not quite bubbles, not quite dust, shimmering when they touched his skin. Then the tunnel widened. Marco emerged into a cavern so vast he couldn't see the edges. The light came from towering spires of crystal rising from the floor, their surfaces twisting with impossible colors. The water was clear here, almost air-like, and when he exhaled, he realized something impossible: he could breathe. He took a deep, startled gasp. No bubbles rose from his mouth. The water filled his lungs without drowning him, cool and sweet, each breath sharp with a metallic tang. Shapes moved between the crystal spires. At first, he thought they were the pale figures from the lake, but these were different, taller, their limbs long and fluid, skin marked with faint lines that shifted like ripples on sand. They moved without swimming, gliding as though the water obeyed them. One of them approached. Its face was smooth, almost human, but the eyes were too deep, the color of storms over an ocean. It spoke without sound, the words blooming directly in Marco's mind. "You heard her. That means you are already bound." Marco tried to speak, to ask who she was, but the figure turned its head sharply toward the tunnel he'd entered from. Something was coming. The water trembled, the crystal spires flickered with urgent light, and from the darkness of the tunnel mouth, a shape emerged, massive, coiled, its eyes burning with the same green glow he had seen on the woman's face in the lake. Chapter 8. Hear voice. The water shivered as the shape slid into the cavern. It wasn't entirely one creature, at least, not in any way Marco understood. The coils were too smooth, too fluid, twisting through the space like living ribbons, vanishing into darkness and reappearing again. Every movement stirred the crystals, making their colors shift and flare. The tall being beside him moved between Marco and the intruder. "Stay still," the thought voice whispered sharply. "It's not you it wants." But the green eyes fixed on him anyway. Then, a new sensation cut through the fear, warm, familiar, and close. Her voice. "You came." It was inside his head, but it felt as if she were speaking directly into his chest. The massive coils slowed, drifting like smoke. The glow of its eyes softened, and from the heart of that writhing mass, a figure emerged. It was her, the pale woman from the lake, hair flowing around her like dark ink in water, eyes burning green. She stepped forward, no swimming, no drifting, just moving through the water as if it parted willingly for her. Marco couldn't speak, even in thought. Her gaze held him in place. "This is not your world," she said, the words wrapping around him like a current. "But they brought you here for a reason." The tall guardian beside him hissed, or the thought of a hiss rang in his mind. "She lies. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. They always say that. The coils began to dissolve into the water, their green light bleeding into the cavern walls. She was the only thing left of the creature, standing now just a few arm lengths away. Her hand rose, fingers pale and long, and the crystals around them dimmed as though bowing to her presence. "If you want to leave alive," she said softly, "you'll follow me before the others find you." Chapter 9. The Passage of Glass. The Guardian's eyes locked on Marco, a silent plea buried in their stormy depths. Do not follow her. But her presence was like gravity, a pull that bent everything else toward her. Marco's thoughts tangled, his chest tightening. He wanted to ask who she was, what she wanted from him, but the words dissolved before they reached his lips. She extended her hand. The water around her fingers shimmered like heat on stone. It was beautiful and wrong. Marco reached out before he realized what he was doing. Her fingers closed around his, cold and smooth, and the moment they touched, the cavern changed. The crystals dimmed to a pale glow, and the space between them filled with thin glass-like sheets that shifted and tilted. Through them, he caught glimpses of frozen forest, a city drowned in black water, a vast desert under a sky the color of blood. "These are places you cannot go yet," she murmured, voice inside and outside his head at once. She led him between the glass panels, each one humming faintly when he passed. The Guardian followed at a distance, silent but relentless, its long frame weaving through the shimmering maze. The further they went, the stranger the water became. It moved in pulses, carrying scents that didn't belong: rain on stone, burning wood, the sweet, overripe rot of fallen fruit. Marco's head swam. Finally, they reached an archway of crystal, so thin it looked like it might shatter if touched. Beyond it was darkness, but not empty. He could feel something there, watching, waiting. She turned to him, her green eyes brighter than ever. "If you cross, there will be no return until it is done." The Guardian's thought voice pressed into his skull like a blade. "She will bind you. She will not let you leave." Marco stood frozen between them, the weight of the lake far above pressing down like the hand of something ancient. Then he stepped through the arch. Chapter 10. The Thing That Waits. The darkness swallowed him whole. It wasn't the black of the deep lake or the shadows between crystals. This was thicker, alive, brushing against his skin like strands of kelp, coiling around his ankles and wrists. His lungs still worked, but every breath felt stolen from someone else. Her hand stayed in his, cold and unshakable. The green of her eyes burned brighter, casting faint ripples through the void. Then shapes began to emerge. They were human, or had been once. Faces twisted by time and pressure, eyes black and bottomless. They circled slowly, their mouths moving in silent chant. Marco felt their voices in the bones of his skull, a rhythm older than the lake itself. "It sleeps, it dreams, it waits." The woman released his hand and drifted forward. The chanting grew louder, the water around them vibrating with each silent word. From the black ahead, something opened its eyes. They were not green, they were vast, silver, and endless. And in them Marco saw the weight of centuries. They were not eyes made to look at humans, but they looked at him. "This," the woman's voice whispered inside him, "is why the tunnel exists. We keep it sleeping, but the ones above, they have begun to stir it." Marco's heart pounded. "Why me?" Her smile was almost human. "Because you listened." The silver eyes blinked once, and the darkness pressed closer. The chanting turned into a roar, still silent, still inside his mind, but deafening all the same. The woman reached for him again. "If you help me, it stays here. If you refuse," the water behind him shifted. The Guardian was there, its storm-colored gaze locked on his. "Do not trust her." Between them, the thing that waited began to move. Marco didn't remember deciding. His hand closed around hers. The silver eyes shut. The roar faded. The darkness receded. When he opened his own eyes, he was on the dock again, dripping and gasping, the lake black and still under the dawn sky. In his pocket was a single strand of wet black hair,